Have you ever wondered what you would do if, in the middle of a storm, you heard a voice whispering from the darkness, "Please, I can't breathe"? Would you walk away, or would you risk everything to find out who was calling? On the wide Montana plains of the late 1800s, one lonely rancher faced that choice. Behind the creak of an old shed door, he discovered not an animal, not a thief, but a young woman bound inside a burlap sack, beaten, broken, and left to die. In that moment, he had to decide: turn away from danger or open himself to a fight that could cost him everything. What if it were you? What if someone's life, a stranger's, suddenly depended on whether you stepped forward or stayed silent? Could you carry that weight? Could you face the danger that followed? This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of dignity, of hope rising out of dust, and of two souls daring to choose life when everything tried to steal it from them. Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss a single heartbeat of this journey. Please, open it. I can't breathe. The words trembled through the wind, thin as smoke, and when the lonely rancher pulled the sack loose, he froze. Wyoming, late 1870s. Evening bled across the plains like bruised gold fading into ash. Heavy clouds pressed low, and the wind roared over the land like some wild creature chasing shadows. On the far edge of that vast emptiness stood a weathered ranch house, its timbers groaning with age. Elias Boone pulled his coat tighter as he stepped out into the storm. Dust curled at his boots, his wide-brim hat snapping with every gust. He had meant to stay inside where the fire was warm and his joints didn't ache so badly, but one of the horses had been kicking at the stall again. He couldn't risk a broken board or a spooked mare. So he walked toward the barn with the steady gait of a man long used to silence. His lantern flickered in the dark, shadows cutting thin across the path. Elias had lived here since boyhood, built the barn with his father, buried his wife Martha when the pox took her, laid his daughter Sarah beside her 2 weeks later. Since then, it had been only him, the wind and the dust. The stall was sound, nothing broken. He was turning back when he stopped cold. Beneath the howl of the gale came something else, a voice faint as a dying breath. Please, open it. I cannot breathe. The sound drifted from the old storage shed, a place he hadn't touched in months. Its warped doors leaned like they might collapse at any moment. Raising the lantern, Elias stepped closer. The voice was muffled, strangled by cloth, almost swallowed by the storm, but he had heard enough. His hand brushed the revolver at his hip as he shoved the crooked door open. The smell struck first dust, sweat, and something metallic, sharp as blood. Lantern light spilled across broken shelves, rusted tools, coils of rope, and then he saw it near a pile of grain sacks. One of them moved, jerked. Again, Elias stepped forward, boots silent on the dirt floor. It wasn't just a sack. It was a person, burlap tied with rope, squirming faintly. The voice came again, raw and desperate. Please, I cannot breathe. Elias set down the lantern and dropped to his knees. His fingers tore at the knots. Whoever had bound her meant she wouldn't be found. The sack peeled open, and the smell grew harsher. A face emerged, young, bruised, lips cracked, a filthy cloth bound across her mouth. He hesitated. Was this some trap? Some lure? His fingers hovered above the gag. She trembled, gasping, body battered and thin. Slowly, Elias pulled the cloth free. She coughed hard, air scraping her throat like sand. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and frightened, impossibly blue. They locked on his. Please, she rasped, voice raw. Don't let them take me again. Elias's chest tightened. He tugged the sack from her head. Blonde hair, matted with blood and sweat, clung to her face. Rope burns scarred her wrists. Scratches lined her arms. I'm not here to hurt you, he said low. She flinched, trying to sit up. No sudden moves, he added. You're safe now. This is my ranch. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Tears streaked her cheeks. They left me here to die. Elias shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her thin shoulders. I don't know who did this, he murmured, but I'll damn sure find out. When he lifted her, she gave a soft cry of pain but didn't resist. Her fingers clutched his shirt as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. Elias cast one last look into the dark, then shoved the shed door closed. The wind screamed outside, but something inside the ranch house had shifted. It was no longer just him. The dust and the silence. By the fire's glow, Elias laid her on the cot. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and old leather, worn but warm. He moved quickly cloth, water basin, the last of the whiskey. Clara Whitlow shivered, eyes wide but unfocused. Dirt streaked across her face, her lips split, her wrists raw. You need to stay awake, he told her softly, at least until I stop the bleeding. She blinked weakly, barely nodding. His hands worked on instinct, steady and precise hands that had buried too many, saved too few. The whiskey made her gasp, but she bore it in silence. When the wounds were cleaned, he pulled a quilt from the cedar chest and covered her. Then he set water to boil and returned with a warm cloth, pressing it gently to her cheek. She flinched, and he drew back. You're safe here. Do you understand? Her eyes flicked to his, then away. She whispered something, barely a breath. What was that he asked? Clara Whitlow. Elias nodded once. All right, Miss Whitlow. Try not to move. What was that? Elias asked. Leaning close, she swallowed, voice rough but steady enough to whisper. Clara Whitlow. He gave a single nod. All right, Miss Whitlow. Don't push yourself. Her chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. I was traveling west, she rasped, with a wagon train, Oregon bound. Elias poured water into a dented tin cup and held it to her lips. She drank greedily, though her hands shook so badly he had to steady the cup. They came at night, she whispered. 3 men, maybe 4. Faces hidden. They pulled me out while the rest slept. Her words wavered, breaking like brittle twigs. Elias listened without moving, his eyes locked on the fire as though it might steady his jaw. They said they'd sell me, she went on, that I'd bring good money in Iron Creek. Saloon there pays for girls. Her face tightened, not with tears, but with shame, like the memory itself weighed her down. Elias's fingers curled tight around his knee. They left you here, he asked. Low. They got spooked, she murmured. Thought someone was following. One hit me when I cried too loud. Next thing, I woke in that sack. She coughed, voice raw. I'm not lying. Her bruised eyes searched his face. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, finally, he said, I believe you. Her shoulders slackened just slightly. You'll rest here tonight, Elias told her. After that, we'll see. She nodded, eyelids sinking. Elias rose and went to the closet. From inside, he drew out 2 things, an old dark green coat with buttons faded by years of wear, Martha's coat, and a ceramic jug wrapped in cloth. Back at the cot, he slipped the jug beneath the blanket at her feet. Just warm water. Keeps the chill away. Then he draped the coat over her thin shoulders. A faint trace of lavender and cedar still clung to the wool. His hand lingered at the collar longer than he meant to, and something in his face softened, sad, hollow, worn down by memory. Clara blinked up at him, half awake, just long enough to see that sorrow flicker across him before he masked it again. Elias dragged a chair close to the cot and sat. "You don't have to stay," she whispered. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." Through the long hours he kept his post. He fed the fire, hushed the kettle when it hissed, adjusted the blanket when she stirred. Once she murmured something in her sleep, a name or a prayer. He didn't ask. He only sat with hat in his lap, eyes never leaving the shadows that pressed at the windows. By dawn, the wind had eased. Pale light crept across the floorboards. Clara slept deeply now, curled into the sleeves of Martha's coat. And Elias Boone, a man who had buried more than most ever should, dared the past to test him again. The sun lifted over the Wyoming hills, spilling gold across the dry pasture. Elias stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hands, scanning the horizon. At first glance, the land looked the same as it always did, quiet, still, empty. But then he saw it. Hoofprints. Fresh. Deep. Not from his stock. Too large. Too recent. He moved slow, following the trail along the barn. The dirt was churned with more than hooves, broad boot prints pressed deep into the earth. When he rounded the paddock, his breath caught. A dog lay in the dust. The stray that had been nosing around his yard for weeks, hunting scraps. Now it lay twisted and still, a neat hole punched between the eyes. Elias knelt beside the body, jaw tightening. This wasn't random. It was a warning. He rose, eyes narrowing, and trailed the tracks toward the cottonwoods. There, burned black into the trunk of a great tree, was a crude mark scorched into the bark. A brand, a symbol. Elias felt his blood run cold. He had seen that mark before on bounty posters, whispered about in town. The Blackthorn Riders, a ruthless gang that trafficked women across the territories, clever enough to avoid the noose, bold enough to leave their calling card where they pleased. They had been here. They were claiming her. Elias turned and strode back fast, boots biting the dust. Inside. Clara sat upright on the cot, Martha's green coat wrapped close. Her eyes were clearer than last night, though heavy circles still clung beneath them. He entered without a word, lantern in hand. "Put your shoes on," he told her. She blinked. What? Why? We don't have time. Fear sparked in her face, but she obeyed, struggling to her feet. "What is it?" They were here, around the barn, left me a message. She froze. "They know." He didn't answer. He handed her a shawl and motioned. She followed, limping but keeping pace. They crossed the yard in silence. Behind the house stood an old hayshed. Dust clouded the air as Elias yanked the doors open. Inside, the smell of dry timber and oil lingered. He moved to the back, shifted crates aside, and pried up a trapdoor hidden beneath. Wood creaked as he lifted it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into dark. "What is this?" Clara whispered. "Storm cellar. Built back when the war pressed close. Held food, supplies, a place to hide." He lit the lantern and held it out. "You'll stay here until I figure our next step." Her throat worked. "I've been locked away enough." "This isn't a prison," Elias said firmly. "It's a shield. You said they'd come for you." She hesitated, then nodded, climbing down slowly. The cellar was small but dry, lined with shelves of old jars and a cot tucked in the corner. Elias set the lantern on a crate and checked the door again. Silence hung heavy between them. "I've run before," Clara said finally, her voice breaking into the quiet. "Twice." Elias turned to her. "First time, I smashed a bottle and slipped out the back. Made it 2 miles before they caught me. They beat me so bad I couldn't walk for days." Her voice cracked, trembled with the memory. "Second time I found a horse untied. Rode hard into the night. Thought I was free. They dragged me off before morning." Her shoulders hunched. "Every time I think I'm gone, they find me." Elias studied her. She stood small in the lantern glow, scars on her wrists like brands of ownership, her eyes haunted but alive. "You're not alone anymore," he said. His tone was rough, unpolished, but steady. She looked at him, uncertain, as though daring herself to believe it. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hiss of the lantern and the wind sighing over the land above them. Elias finally exhaled, long and slow. "We'll need a plan," he muttered, "because the Blackthorn Riders don't give up easy, and I sure as hell won't let them take you back." Clara closed her eyes, tears glinting but not falling. For the first time in too long, someone had spoken those words aloud, not as a bargain, not as a lie, but as a vow. And in the stillness of that cellar beneath the Wyoming soil, Elias Boone made an unspoken promise whatever came. He would stand between her and the riders. The fight was only beginning. The lantern flame trembled against the cellar wall as Clara whispered, her voice breaking like dry branches. "Second time I hid in a supply wagon. I made it all the way to a stagecoach stop before one of them found me again." Her eyes glistened. They said if I tried once more, they'd kill me slow. Elias Boone stood quiet, his broad shoulders filling the low space. Clara's voice softened into almost nothing. "I don't know why I'm still breathing, but I want to. I want to live this time." The words hung heavy in the damp air, louder than any storm above. Elias stepped closer, unhooked the revolver from his belt, and placed it on the shelf beside her cot. "If anyone comes down those stairs and it isn't me, you shoot." Clara stared at the weapon, then at him. "I don't even know how." "You'll learn," he said. His voice was flat, unbending. Then he added, "And if you can't scream, I'll hear." For the first time since he had cut her from the sack, something like a smile touched her bruised face. Elias reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small tin of jerky, and set it on the shelf beside the revolver. "I'll check every hour," he told her. "The hatch will be locked from the outside, but I won't be far." Then he climbed the steps, pulled the door shut, and dropped the bolt into place. Above ground, the wind was rising again, scraping across the plains with a wild hiss. Elias leaned against the doorframe, staring over the land he had lived on all his life. This was no accident. This was war. By late afternoon, the wind eased, the sun dipping low and throwing long shadows across the corral. Elias was mending a gate when he saw dust lift from the southern road. 3 riders. They came steady, not like men passing through, but like men who knew exactly where they were headed. Elias straightened, wiped his brow with the back of his hand, and waited. The horses clattered up to the porch. The rider in the middle raised a hand in mock greeting. "Evening, friend." Elias didn't answer. The 3 stopped just shy of the steps. The one in the center spoke again. "We're looking for someone. Young woman, brown hair, might have come this way. Doesn't talk much." The man on his left grinned, showing broken teeth. "She's got family. Owes us." Elias's voice was low and steady. "You her kin." The oldest of the 3 spat into the dust. "Blood or bond. Makes no difference." Elias stepped forward, hand resting easy on his rifle. "Kin don't stuff a girl in a sack and leave her half dead." The middle rider's eyes narrowed. "You're making dangerous assumptions." "I saw the bruises," Elias said. "Heard her fight for breath. If that's how you treat family, I'd hate to see your enemies." The youngest shifted in the saddle, fingers brushing his belt. The old one growled, "Careful, rancher. That girl belongs to us." Elias climbed the porch step, calm and deliberate, his hand tightening on the rifle. No, she doesn't. A silence hung for a heartbeat. Then the middleman nudged his horse forward. The youngest tensed, ready. Metal whispered a gun slipping free. "Last chance," the boy snapped. "Turn her over." Elias raised the rifle, quick and sharp. One shot split the air. The bullet struck dirt inches from the horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. Dust swirled as the three jerked back. Elias didn't move. Next one won't miss. They backed slowly, eyes burning. The leader spat into the ground. "You'll regret this. She ain't yours. Not anymore," Elias said evenly. They wheeled their horses and tore off, dust rising behind them. Elias watched until their shadows faded over the ridge. He stood long after, until the only sound was the moan of the wind and the creak of the barn. That night came early. Inside, he gathered scraps of metal, screws, and tools, then carried them to the shed. When he lifted the trap door, Clara sat upright on the cot, pale but alert. "They came, didn't they?" she asked. Elias nodded. "3 of them. Claimed you were kin." Clara let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "They always do. I sent them away," Elias said. "But they'll be back. I know." He knelt and fitted a small lock and latch onto the hatch. "This will hold better than a bolt." She watched him work, voice tight. "You think they'll come at night?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a knife, setting it beside her cot. Then he laid down a folded scrap of paper. "What's that?" she asked. "If I don't come back," he said, "take the blade, head northwest about 6 miles. You'll find Pine Hollow Station. It's abandoned, but there's a well and some supplies." Clara's hand shook as she picked up the note. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Elias met her eyes. "I know you want to live." He climbed out, bolted the hatch, then braced the shed door with iron beams. Every gust of wind made the wood groan, but his hand stayed steady. Inside, Clara unfolded the note. His rough script read, "You don't owe anyone your silence. Not anymore." She pressed the words to her chest, then tucked the note under her pillow. When she lay back, her hand rested on the knife not from fear, but from readiness. Above, the moon rose sharp and cold. Elias sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, eyes on the darkness. The storm struck fast. Twilight turned the plains into a rolling sea of black clouds. Thunder cracked like gunfire across the hills. The wind screamed, ripping at the boards, rattling every window of the ranch house. Elias was still outside, fixing loose planks along the northern fence. He had told Clara to stay hidden, bolt the hatch, and wait until he returned. But storms had a way of tearing plans apart. In the cellar, Clara huddled beneath a coarse blanket, the note clutched in one hand. Every crack of thunder made her flinch. The lantern flickered, shadows crawling up the stone walls. She whispered Elias's name once, just to hear it in the air, as if saying it might anchor her against the storm. Above, Elias braced himself against the gale, his coat whipping around him. He hammered a final board into place, but his eyes kept drifting toward the shed. He knew what the riders were capable of, and storms often covered more than wind and rain. They masked footsteps. They hid ambushes. The Blackthorn Riders could already be near. And Elias Boone, standing alone on his ranch with nothing but his rifle, knew the night was far from over. Rain hammered the Dawson Ranch as if the heavens themselves were intent on tearing the roof away. The storm was wild, relentless, rattling the shutters and howling through the chimney like some angry spirit set loose on the Montana plains. In the cellar, Rachel Monroe clutched Caleb's note in one hand, the knife he had given her in the other. her pulse loud in her ears. The lantern on the shelf sputtered, flame shrinking, shadows pressing close around her. Her throat was dry. The memory of the water jug Caleb had left in the kitchen tugged at her, urging her to climb those narrow steps. For a long time she resisted, but thirst overcame fear. She pressed her palm to the trapdoor and pushed it open. The house above was hushed except for the shrieking wind. She moved through the darkness barefoot, her heart pounding. The kitchen was colder than she expected, each gust down the chimney sending pots rattling. She found the jug on the counter and poured water into the tin cup. The metal was icy against her lips. That was when the glass shattered. The east window blew inward with a violent crash, shards skittering across the floor. Rachel froze, the cup tumbling from her hand. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, and heavy. Her breath caught in her throat. A shadow moved through the parlor, tall and broad. The man's voice was low and vicious. "Don't scream, girl, or I'll smash your teeth in." She turned, ready to run, but he lunged. His hand caught her hair and yanked her backward. She hit the floor hard, pain flashing up her spine, blinking through tears. She saw his face jaw scarred from an old wound, coat ragged, eyes flattened, merciless. "Boss says you're worth a pile," he growled, his breath sour, "but only if you behave." He lifted a boot to strike her. Rachel's hand flew out. Her fingers closed on the knife Caleb had left by the table. With a desperate cry, she slashed upward. Steel bit flesh. The man cursed, staggering back. Blood welled from his arm. She scrambled to rise, her ankle screaming in protest, but he was on her again, striking out. She twisted, drove the blade once more. He roared, catching her wrist, and slammed her into the wall so hard her teeth rattled. His fist drew back. "You stupid girl. You think you're walking away from this?" The front door burst wide. Lightning flashed, bathing the room in white fire. Caleb Dawson stood framed in the storm, soaked through, his rifle leveled and steady. Without a word, he fired. The intruder spun, hit in the shoulder, collapsing against the hearth. Smoke from the rifle hung in the air, sharp and acrid. Caleb stepped inside, water dripping from his hat brim. His eyes were cold as steel. "Move again," he said evenly, "and you'll be carried out in a box." The man whimpered, clutching his wound, rage flickering but fading under Caleb's stare. Caleb turned to Rachel. "Can you stand?" Her voice trembled. "I think so." He eased her to her feet, letting her lean against him. Each step sent fire up her swollen ankle, but she didn't resist his help. He led her to the bedroom and settled her carefully on the bed. Her lip was split, blood streaking down her chin, clothes torn. "Let me see," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You fought like hell. You did good." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought it was the end. I thought I'd never breathe again." "But you did," he said, his voice low. "And you're safe now." He fetched a tin box from the dresser, soaked a rag in whiskey, and cleaned her cuts with patient hands. When he reached her ankle, he frowned. The swelling was bad. He looked around the room, then opened a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were folded clothes, kept with care though long untouched. He pulled out a blue flannel shirt, soft from years of wear. Rachel noticed the initials stitched into the cuff. This was hers. She whispered, "Anna's." Caleb said quietly. His mouth curved with a sad smile. "She stitched her name into everything. Said I'd lose my head if it wasn't tied on." He tore the sleeve and wrapped it gently around Rachel's ankle, tight enough to hold, not enough to hurt. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. He stood by the window, rain streaking down the glass. His shoulders sagged for just a moment. "She was everything to me," he murmured, almost to himself. "But you matter too." Silence stretched, filled only by the fading storm. It was not pity in his voice, nor fear in hers. Something else lingered, an understanding neither dared name. By dawn, the storm had moved east, leaving the plains soaked and shining. Fog clung to the low ridges. Caleb moved through the barn with purpose, packing what little they could carry. Jerky, hardtack, canteens, a map folded and worn. His hands moved with quiet efficiency, as if preparing for war. Rachel leaned against the barn door, her ankle bound in Anna's flannel, her face pale but resolute. The bruises had not faded, but there was a light in her eyes now, something fiercer than fear. Caleb fastened the saddle straps on 2 horses. "You'll ride the black mare," he said. "She's steady and doesn't spook easy." Rachel nodded, then asked softly, "Why are you doing this for me?" Caleb met her gaze. "Because if I don't, no one else will." They rode out at first light. The land was broken, ridges jagged, creek beds dry. Rachel leaned forward in the saddle, gripping tight as pain throbbed in her ankle, but she didn't complain. Caleb led the way, rifle strapped across his back, every step of his horse measured, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was merciless by midday. No travelers passed. Only crows circled overhead, black wings gliding on the hot air like warnings. They paused in the shade of a sandstone bluff. Caleb studied the map again, tracing a route northwest with his calloused finger. "If we can reach the dry gulch before nightfall, we'll be halfway to the forest trail." Rachel offered him water. "Is it safe there?" He gave a tired half-smile. "Safe. Nowhere is safe anymore." They pressed on. The canyon mouth rose ahead, red stone walls closing in tight. Caleb slowed. The silence was wrong. No birds, no wind, only the steady clop of hooves echoing back at them. The first gunshot cracked like lightning. Caleb lurched forward, blood blooming across his shoulder. His horse reared, screaming. He nearly toppled from the saddle. Rachel's scream echoed through the canyon as shadows moved above them. Figures crouched along the ridges, rifles raised, the Blackthorn Riders closing in. 3 figures stepped from the canyon rocks like shadows given form. 2 crouched above on the ledge with rifles drawn, while the 3rd barred the path ahead, horse stamping in the dust. Rachel Monroe's breath caught in her chest as recognition struck. The scarred man she had cut in the Dawson ranch house was smiling at her now, his grin jagged and mean. "Thought you could outrun me, sweetheart." His voice dripped with malice. Caleb Dawson slumped in his saddle, barely conscious, blood soaking his shirt. Panic surged in Rachel. She seized his reins and kicked hard at her mare's flank. The animal leapt forward, dragging Caleb's mount with it. They shot down a narrow cut in the gulch, stones spraying beneath pounding hooves. Gunfire cracked, the sound rolling off the canyon walls like thunder. A bullet ripped through Rachel's sleeve, grazing her arm, but she didn't flinch. Her only thought was to keep Caleb alive. Shouts followed, horses pounding close behind. She spotted a fallen log spanning a shallow ravine and ducked low, yanking Caleb's horse beneath it. The path twisted, hidden behind stone. Out of sight at last. Rachel swung down, her legs trembling. Caleb sagged in his saddle until she pulled him into her arms. His face was gray, lips tight with pain. Blood poured between his fingers as he pressed a rag against the wound. "Easy," she whispered fiercely. "Stay with me." His eyelids fluttered. "You ride like hell," he rasped. "You're not dying," she snapped, tearing his shirt with shaking hands. "I wasn't planning to," he muttered, his attempt at humor cut short by a hiss of pain. From her saddlebag, she pulled the flask, poured whiskey over the wound. Caleb gritted his teeth, groaning as the fire of liquor burned deep. She ignored his protest and bound the shoulder with quick, practiced motions, remembering how he had once tended her with that same steady patience. When she finished, she touched his forehead lightly. His skin burned with fever, but his breath came steady. That was enough for now. Rachel leaned back, her own arm bleeding, her ankle aching, but none of it mattered. The man who had pulled her from the dark now leaned on her to survive. The canyon echoed with hoofbeats, then faded. The riders had pulled back for the moment. By morning, the pair reached the edges of Sage Hollow. The forgotten town sat crooked against the plains, a leaning water tower casting its shadow across a dirt main street. Windows of the saloon were patched with newspaper, the mine long abandoned. It was a place time had passed by. Caleb dismounted stiffly, swaying from blood loss. Rachel caught his arm to steady him, her jaw set with quiet determination. "The sheriff's office," Caleb said, voice rough. Rachel guided him there. The building was small, slats weathered gray, a single star-shaped sign dangling loose on the door. Inside, the smell of tobacco and worn leather lingered. Behind the desk sat a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, hair silver at the temples, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He looked up and froze. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. Caleb Dawson, crawling out of the dirt. Caleb's mouth twitched into a faint smile. Still breathing. Thomas. Barely. Marshal Thomas Avery rose, clapped his old friend on the shoulder with surprising gentleness. His gaze slid to Rachel, and one brow lifted. Caleb's voice dropped low. "I need your help." The warmth in Avery's eyes hardened. They sat, and Caleb recounted everything: the sack on the prairie, the riders, the scarred man, the ambush. Rachel filled in the gaps, her voice steady though her hands trembled in her lap. The marshal listened without a word, his jaw tightening as the story unfolded. When they finished, he leaned back, exhaling slow. "I've heard whispers," he said. "Stagecoaches hit, girls disappearing, miners gone without trace, but never proof. No one who lived to tell it." He fixed his gaze on Rachel. "Until now. You're the first, maybe the only." Rachel met his eyes, her voice calm. "Not if we stop them." Avery's lips pressed thin, then curved in a grim nod. "Been waiting years to catch those devils red-handed. Let's give them something they can't walk away from." That night, the trap was set. An old freight warehouse on the edge of town, empty since the mine shut down, became their battleground. 6 deputies hid inside, rifles leveled from shadows behind crates and broken wagons. Horses were tied outside in silence. Rachel wore a dark shawl, standing near the entrance with her head bowed, playing bait. Caleb leaned on a crutch, rifle hanging from his shoulder, wound still raw but his jaw hard with resolve. The hours dragged heavy, until finally the thunder of hooves broke the night. 4 riders, their silhouettes stretched long in lamplight. Rachel's breath caught. The scarred man rode at the front, his sneer familiar as a nightmare. Well, he drawled as he dismounted, eyes fixed on her. "Didn't expect you'd come back here." "Girl." "She didn't," Caleb said, stepping forward with deliberate calm. "We brought you." Confusion flickered in the outlaw's eyes, and in that moment the trap sprung. Gunfire erupted from the rafters, from the windows, from every dark corner of the warehouse. Bullets tore through wood and wagon wheels, shattering the silence into chaos. The riders scattered, firing back. A deputy cried out, clutching his arm, another returning fire to drop one man near the water barrels. The scarred outlaw lunged, seizing Rachel and dragging her close, his breath hot against her ear. "Thought you could run forever." She drove her elbow into his ribs and twisted free, ducking low. Caleb did not hesitate. His rifle cracked once. The scarred man staggered back, blood blooming across his side. His sneer faltered into shock before he crumpled against the wall, sliding into a pool of his own blood. Another rider bolted for the loading door, but Marshal Avery met him head-on, fists flying with the fury of a man who had waited years for this moment. Two others broke free, galloping into the dark. Shots rang after them, but they vanished into the night. It didn't matter. The ring was broken. Rachel stood in the shadows, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, chest heaving as she stared at the body of the scarred man. The fear that had once defined her was gone, replaced by something harder, forged in fire and blood. Caleb limped to her side, his rifle still warm in his hands. He looked at her, then at the fallen outlaw. "It's over," he said. Rachel shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. "Not yet. Not until the rest of them are gone." Marshal Avery straightened, dusting blood from his knuckles. His eyes glinted with the same steel. "Then, that's where we start." The night air was heavy with gunpowder and smoke. But in that broken warehouse, among the fallen, a war that had hidden in whispers was finally dragged into the open. And for the first time since Rachel Monroe had begged for air in a sack, she knew she was not alone. Rachel stepped closer, the echoes of gunfire still hanging in the warehouse. The scarred man lay slumped against the wall, blood seeping into the dust. His chest heaved once, then again, and his lips curled in a twisted grin. "You were the last one," he rasped. "The final piece. The prize." His hand jerked toward the revolver on his belt. Rachel's breath hitched, but before she could move, Marshal Avery raised his weapon and fired. The shot cracked through the night, and the outlaw crumpled, still at last. Silence settled heavy. Smoke drifted through the broken windows, lantern lights swaying and creaking overhead. Rachel stared at the man who had haunted her every nightmare. She felt no victory, only release. Caleb limped to her side, leaning on his crutch, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's done," he said. Rachel looked up at him, and for the first time in months, there was something steady in her eyes. Hope. Weeks later, the courthouse in Deadwood overflowed with townsfolk, miners, and ranchers who had come to witness the trials. Dust floated in golden beams of sunlight as the judge's gavel cracked like distant thunder. Rachel sat in the witness chair, her back straight, hands clasped tight in her lap. Her voice trembled at first, but her eyes did not waver. She told them everything: the sack, the bruises, the nights of fear, the escapes, the ambush in the gulch. Each word carved into the silence of the courtroom. Then Caleb stood, his voice low and unwavering, recounting how he had found her, how he had faced the riders, how justice had finally cornered them in Sage Hollow. No one spoke when he finished. The quiet itself was a judgment. By the end of the week, arrests stretched across 3 counties. The Blackthorn Riders network collapsed. Those who had preyed on the weak were in chains. Their leader would never speak again, buried in an unmarked grave outside town. Justice had taken too long to come, but at last it had arrived. After the hearings, the district marshal offered Caleb a commission in the ranger service again. He shook his head. "I've done enough chasing ghosts," he said simply. "Time I went home." But this time, he wasn't going back alone. Spring crept slow across the Montana plains. Snow melted late, but when the grass came, it rose thick and green, soft beneath bare feet. Caleb sat on the porch one afternoon, mending the old rocking chair with a tin of nails at his side. He hummed under his breath, a tune Anna had once loved. The front door creaked. Rachel stepped out barefoot, her hair loose in the breeze. She wore the same faded shirt Caleb had once torn into bandages for her shoulder, now brightened with uneven sunflower stitches along the sleeves. In her hand, she held a folded paper. She placed it in his palm without a word. A marriage certificate already signed. Her voice was soft but steady. "We could begin again," she said, "if you want." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, the way the light caught in her hair, the lines of fear erased from her face, replaced by strength. He set down his hammer, rose, and drew her into his arms. No words, only the kind of embrace that spoke of safety, of belonging, of home. Their wedding was simple. Friends from Sage Hollow gathered. Marshall Avery stood beside them. A fiddle struck up a tune. Children scattered wildflowers across the grass, and old-timers clapped along to the rhythm. The wide Montana sky stretched golden overhead, the hills glowing like painted silk. Rachel rode beside Caleb on a bay mare, her dress light as wind, her smile brighter than the morning sun. People called out blessings, but Caleb's words were the only ones she remembered. As the sun sank behind the ridge, he leaned close, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "That first night," he whispered, "when you called out from that sack, all I heard was fear." His hand lingered against her skin. "But now I hear home." Rachel's throat tightened. Tears blurred her eyes, but she let them fall, because for the first time, they weren't born of fear. The land stretched wide and endless before them, not as a prison, but as a promise. And as the last notes of the fiddle drifted into the evening air, Caleb Dawson and Rachel Monroe began again. Not as survivors, but as two souls who had found home in each other. At its heart, this story is not only about the Wild West, it is about the choices we make when faced with fear and loss. Caleb Dawson, a man who had already buried too much, could have turned away when he heard Rachel's voice. Instead, he chose compassion over comfort, courage over silence. And in that choice, he not only saved her life, he also rediscovered his own reason to keep living. For those of us looking back over 6 decades of life or more, the lesson rings clear no matter our age, no matter our losses. Life still calls us to act with dignity and courage. We may not face outlaws or ambushes, but we face our own storms, illness, loneliness, the ache of losing loved ones. What we choose to do in those moments defines us. The story reminds us that healing often begins with simple acts of courage, opening a door, offering a hand, speaking up when silence is easier. It tells us that hope can be found at any age, that love and new beginnings are not just for the young, but for anyone willing to keep their heart open. Thank you for riding with us through this story. Your time and presence mean more than words can say. If this tale touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps our community grow and keeps these stories alive. Until next time, may you carry courage and hope wherever the trail leads.